I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of this symposium for inviting me to speak today. I appreciate the opportunity to come together with those who serve and have served our country and other members of the heritage community to discuss how we can work together to preserve our province's military history. So thank you all for having me today. All right, I'll begin with a very short introduction to the Royal Alberta Museum, or the RAM for short, for those not familiar. To start, we're located in downtown Edmonton's Arts District, just northeast across the street from City Hall. We've been there since 2018 when we moved over from our original location in the Glenora neighborhood. We have 5.1 million artifacts and specimens in 12 curatorial programs. Our role is to preserve, collect, research, and share objects that represent Alberta's people and the natural environment. We're Alberta's provincial museum, so we have a province-wide collecting mandate. The program's the Military and Government History Program, which is one of the 12 curatorial programs at the RAM. We have 65,000 objects representing the province's military and government history. We have a broad mandate covering the military, all government services that operate in Alberta, and at all levels of government, such as police, fire department, postal material, education, and so on. We also collect objects that represent Alberta's political history, including political parties, personalities, and movements. In the military section, we have everything from uniforms and equipment to medals and personal items. We also have a large collection of more than 3,000 prisoner of war and home front artifacts and 2,000 civilian and military firearms. So with that information in place, here's a rough outline of my presentation. There are 3 sections. The first is what we collect. Second is how to donate objects to the RAM, and the third is preserving our military heritage, our shared role. So what do we collect? As a museum, we collect objects. I'll be talking a lot about objects during this presentation. So what is an object? According to the Alberta Museums Association, an object is an artifact, specimen, or work of art held in a museum collection. These are typically physical, often 3D items, such as tunics, trousers, equipment, weapons, various personal items, etc. And I just want to clarify, as many museums also have an archives wing, we are not an archives. The Provincial Archives of Alberta is the province's official repository for documents, photographs, and other forms of records. We typically only accept archival material if it supports or directly relates to an object that is being donated. A simple example would be that we would collect a photograph of a soldier in uniform if we're collecting the uniform. If it's purely an archival collection, it should go to an archives. We don't collect airplanes or vehicles. There are other museums that collect these, and we have speakers from some of these museums today. In fact, the airplanes and vehicles on display in the museum are loaned to us by the Reynolds Alberta Museum, such as the Tiger Moth in this photo. And unless there's a very compelling reason to do so, we do not collect live ammunition. We don't typically display it, and in the 13 years I've worked at the museum, I haven't received a single research or loan request for ammunition. So it's not really worth the special storage considerations and extra liability. We also don't collect non-Albertan material, which brings me to my next slide about our collecting criteria. So what do we consider when we're offered an object or a collection of objects? First is relevance. And as I mentioned before, we're Alberta's museum. So does the object relate to Alberta or Albertans? If not, we're not able to accept it. Regarding firearms, we're not mandated to collect an example of every type of firearm. The object or firearm needs to have a history of use in the Canadian military, in which of course Albertans serve, or a government service in Alberta. Or it needs to have a strong connection to Alberta or to an Albertan. Representation, so does it fill a gap in the collection? Is the object or the story that it tells already represented in the collection? We don't want to unnecessarily duplicate material in the collection, as our space and resources are quite limited. Integrity, is it authentic, complete, or in acceptable condition? So unless the object or its story is truly remarkable, we avoid taking objects that require extensive conservation treatments. Now that said, I'd like to dispel the myth of museum quality. In many cases, we don't want the shiny and new object. We want the object that has been worn and used by you and that shows its use. So think about what's more interesting and what better represents the history of an object. So you have a pair of rarely used combat boots that are in great condition. It looks like they've never been worn. Or you have your well-worn boots that are embedded with dust and the treads are worn out from patrolling in Afghanistan. If we had to choose, we'd take the latter. And provenance, does it have a history of ownership and use? So I'm going to show you two examples of objects that highlight the importance of provenance. So most people will recognize this. This is a cribbage board made out of a plain piece of wood and brass pegs. So what, right? Well, the story that this object holds is what makes it interesting and significant. Arnold Betts of the 66th Battalion CEF and another soldier were exploring the ruins of Ypres Cathedral during the First World War. When the Germans started shelling the area, on their way out of the building, Arnold picked up this piece of wood. He then made it into a cribbage board. After the war, he taught his granddaughter how to play on this board. So this object holds multiple layers of meaning. It represents the experiences of Arnold Betts during the war. It represents a place, Ypres Cathedral specifically, or the Ypres area more generally. And to the family, it represents Arnold himself and their memories of him. So without this provenance, without this story, it's just a cribbage board, and we wouldn't have known to accept it. All right, here's another example. This is a .22 caliber Cooey Ace 1. The barrel's floated on a piece of rubber, and it's held together by tape. If we didn't know anything else about this firearm, would we take it? Probably not. So what if I told you that this rifle was used to kill the world's largest grizzly bear in 1953? Bella Twin, a Cree Iroquois grandmother from Slave Lake, was returning from her trap line when she came across a grizzly bear. This Calgary Herald newspaper reported that using her rabbit gun, she shot it by the ear where the skull's weak. The bear fell and she shot it several more times in the same spot, killing it. So you can see the bullet grouping in the bottom middle photo here. So this is a pretty remarkable story. So yes, we did accept the rifle, and the museum also has the bear skin in the collection. So do you remember when I was talking about the misconception of museum quality? Well, this rifle is a great example that shows that condition's not everything. Sometimes the history is more important to us. So you have an object or a group of objects that you think would be a good fit to donate to the RAM. What do? The general process and collecting criteria are the same for firearms and non-firearms. Of course, when dealing with firearms, please follow the rules and regulations outlined by the Canadian Firearms Program. All right, with that said, how do you donate objects to the museum? To start, please reach out to us. We're always happy to chat, and we can steer you in the right direction even if it doesn't align with our mandate. The best way to reach us is by email. You can contact us through our main email address, and it'll get directed to the appropriate curator. Or if it's military or government related, you can contact me directly at matthew.ostapchuk@gov.ab.ca. I have business cards if you're interested, so you don't have to write that name down. You can also find our contact information on our website, royalalbertamuseum.ca. And it's very helpful to us if you prepare a bit of information before contacting us. So if possible, please provide a description of what you're offering. If there are lots of objects, the list is very helpful. Include any known provenance, such as information about how you acquired the material, who used it, when, and in what circumstances. Also, are there any interesting stories that relate to the objects? Please include images of the objects, including any markings or inscriptions. These can be photos of groupings of objects if there's more than one item. And note where the material is currently located, such as the city or town. From there, we should be able to assess if the material is a good fit for us, and we might have some follow-up questions. So what to expect if we are interested in collecting the material? Well, first, as I mentioned, we'll likely have additional questions. We'll arrange to receive the objects. At this point, we normally complete a temporary custody receipt, meaning we have possession of the material, but not yet ownership. This allows us to complete additional research to inform our decision and itemize the objects that we recommend for acquisition. For every single object we acquire, even if it's a $5 button, we need to submit a justification to our acquisition review committee for approval before we can accept it. I mentioned our collecting criteria a few slides ago. The committee reviews each proposed acquisition against our collecting criteria. Once we have approval and confirm what we will be accepting, we then complete a certificate of gift. This document formally and permanently transfers ownership to the museum. In most cases, if the value exceeds $100, we're able to issue a tax receipt for the gift. And if you're interested and if it's applicable, we would conduct an informal donor interview to capture additional information or stories in your own words. We discussed what to do. Here's a bit about what not to do, please. Please do not drop off a bag of objects at the door or with security or admissions. They've been instructed not to accept anything. We have, as I mentioned, paperwork and procedures that we need to follow, and they're not trained to accept material, so it will be turned away. The same goes with mailing objects to us without prior communication. I don't recommend showing up without an appointment. We're often away from our desks, in meetings, working in our labs or storage rooms, or off-site meeting with the public. There's a fairly small chance you'll have success just dropping in. Additionally, we often need to do preliminary research into our existing collection before we can advise if the object's a good fit and before we can take custody of an object. Please don't bequeath or will objects to us without contacting us in advance. This is not great estate planning. We're not obligated to accept the material, and without provenance, we'll likely have to decline the material. Really, we want to talk to you to get your personal story or the story of the objects. It's unfortunate when we get notified that we've been willed objects and that we can't get any information or history about them. So if you or your family decide that you're not ready to part with your objects or militaria, that's fine. We're not trying to wrestle them from you. We're happy to consider them when you're ready to part with them. In the meantime, there are things that you can do to care for your objects. As we discussed earlier, provenance is extremely important, so please write down or record what makes the object special or important, not just what the object is, but its specific significance to you and your story or experiences. Remember that once you're gone, so too is your ability to tell the story. For the physical care of objects, it's important to monitor light, temperature, humidity, and pests. Light can cause certain objects, like textiles and inks, for example, to fade. So direct sunlight or UV light is typically the worst, though high levels of artificial light can also speed up fading. So if you're displaying your objects, avoid having them in direct sunlight or exposed to really high levels of light. Temperatures or humidities that are too high, low, or that swing too much can cause cracking, molding, warping, and material failure. It's best to store items in places that have relatively consistent heat and humidity, such as in your home. You probably don't want to store them in an unheated lake cabin, storage locker, garage, or even in your basement or attic. Storing objects in these less desirable places can also increase the chance of pests damaging or destroying them. If handling metal objects such as firearms, military metals, coins, etc., or materials that stain easily, it's best to wear cotton or nitrile gloves to avoid the oils on your hands from damaging the objects. And obviously handle with care, and preferably when you're handle over a table to limit how far an object will drop if you happen to drop it. Damage through handling is one of the main ways that objects are damaged. One piece of advice I'll pass along from our conservation team is to use common sense when putting things away, and when putting them away, expect that you won't return to them for several years, so do it right the first time. We all tuck things away thinking we'll get back to them soon, and then 20 years have passed and you finally return to them when you go to move. Storage supplies. So if possible, use archival grade materials. Look for products that say archival grade, as they're typically more stable and they off-gas less. And generally avoid common cardboards, as cardboard is acidic and can degrade objects. Stable plastic bins, such as polypropylene or polyethylene, and if you look at the bottom of a bin, it'll have a little PP if it's polypropylene, or PE or PETE if it's polyethylene. They're better options than cardboard boxes. And actually, most food-safe resealable bags are quite stable as well. So if you don't know how to store or display a specific item, ask us. We're happy to help. There are some great resources available for the care and preservation of objects. The Canadian Conservation Institute has lots of great information. I recommend checking out their website. If you're interested in best practices for the care and preservation of firearms, I suggest reading Philip White's technical bulletin on the care and preservation of firearms. If you simply search on the internet Philip White preservation of firearms, it should be the first search result. You're also welcome to reach out to us at the Royal Alberta Museum for advice. We have object conservators on staff, and I'm not one of them, but they can answer any more specific or technical questions that you have. So to summarize, if you're interested in donating objects to the museum, just get in touch with us to start the conversation. I hope it came across today that we not only collect and preserve objects, but we also care for the stories that come with these objects. If you want to hang on to your objects, think about documenting the provenance or the story, and with preservation in mind, think about how you're storing or displaying those objects. Again, if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.